Shares of a corporation. How do they work? What do they mean? Why do I always say that the corporation is the only form of business operations that provides us with the most flexible and the most efficient tools to support our future business development? Hi, and welcome back. Again, me, Eugene from CBS, Canadian Business and Enterprise Services. And today I would like to provide you with a little bit better understanding of what shares are, which tools they provide us with, and to help you to use those tools, which most people don't do, to support future development of your business. Okay, but nothing today will be touching the investment, the stock exchange. Today's introduction, just as any other video of mine, is intended for small and medium business owners that plan to start or develop their business in Canada or Ontario, respectively. So let's start. First of all, what are shares and what do they mean? Share, by its definition, means a portion of a corporation that we own or control, and accordingly, we can divide the corporation into different types, different levels of parts and pieces that will provide us with the tools, as I always call them, for the future business development and expansion of our business. So first of all, what actually is share? And the share actually is the theoretical agreement between us as business owners, my partners, my investors, that define what rights, benefits, privileges, entitlements, and responsibilities each of us gets through participation in a corporation by the means of shares. Okay, but also as any other agreement, the beauty of the shares is that they provide us with lots of flexibility in our approach of definition of those rights and privileges and responsibilities, and balancing the powers, interests of each of the parties. Just as any agreement, we can adjust it to each type of corporations based on your particular situation and circumstances, and the options of variations is almost unlimited. Now let's talk about what are those privileges and rights that are attached to a share. So first one that most of people would know is control. And control provides us with two basic means of control over the corporation. As a shareholder, you remember we do not operate the corporation, we only own the shares, and through our controlling shares, we appoint directors, the actual masterminds behind the corporation that control its operations, decide how to develop, how to expand, and which type of business operations to move into in the future. The other type of control as shareholders, we can decide at certain points about selling our corporation or about dissolving, killing the corporation, and that's it. No more control, no more involvement as a shareholder in the corporation. Of course, in most of the small and medium businesses, we would appoint ourselves as directors of a corporation, and that's really the means to execute that control over the business. Second privilege is dividends. So by owning shares, we get the right to participate in the distribution of profits or proceeds of the corporation, which is called dividends. And shares would define which portion and on which conditions or terms we get the dividends. Now here we should remember two basic rules. Rule number one, directors of a corporation are those who decide about the distribution of dividends, which means as a shareholders, although we can own a corporation, we do not decide at which point it distributes its profits. And sometimes directors might decide not to distribute the profits, to reinvest it into the business development, while we as shareholders would want to get that money. The other rule is that the corporation cannot distribute dividends if it will not have enough funds to cover its existing current liabilities. So we cannot distribute profits to shareholders on behalf of the creditors of the corporation. And now, eventually, the third privilege that is attached to shares, and that is the ownership, the equity, which means what percentage of the actual corporate value do we own? And as you could realize, the only point where that question becomes relevant is when we sell the corporation. When we sell it, we get the price, we pay the debts and liabilities of the corporation, and what is left we can distribute among existing shareholders that own portion of the equity of the corporation. So with these three privileges, now that we understand what are they, we have to understand the next rule. And the next rule says that the privileges can be attached to different types of shares. They can all three be existing in one type of shares or spread among different types of shares. It's just there always should be enough types of shares to cover all three privileges. So from here we can come to a better understanding of what actually classes of shares means. Classes of share could be almost infinite and unlimited variations, but most of the groups of those classes would include two common shares that are the basic type of shares that would include all three of the privileges. So common shares are those shares that we get when we initially incorporate the business, and they would provide us with control, with the dividends and the ownership of a corporation, and they would work well at the very initial stages of our business development. The moment we want to grow, we want to bring investors, partners, those common shares will require proper adjustments and specifications to support the interests of each of the parties involved in our business. Then there are preference shares. Technically, the only difference between preference shares and common shares, and that's why they call preference, is that because those shares will have a provision that provides them with a priority or preference over other classes of shares in the distributions of either dividends or the equity of the corporation. So technically, they will be the first ones to be paid in line, and only after them, common shares and other classes of shares will get paid. Now, each of these classes I can spread into unlimited amount of classes, subclasses, groups, and I can attach separate privileges to each of those classes. Now, why do I always say that shares are a tool for our business development? We can use common shares to support our partners, those who are interested in the growth of the corporation, in the profits of the corporation, the control of the corporation, those people who invest their resources, their knowledge, their energy together with us into growing our business. On the other side, I can use preference shares to provide a consideration for investors that want to invest into our company, not by the means of loans, by the means of purchase of shares, providing us with the operating finances, and in return getting the shares that provide them with certain entitlements for dividends of the equity of the corporation in priority to anyone else in the company. And I can use also separate subclasses of shares to answer the interests of each of the parties. So someone will get the dividends before the others, but others will not get the equity, and the third party will get only control, and so on and so forth. That is the beauty of the shares, in my opinion. I can split them as I want, almost on any way and level of each of those privileges among different classes of shares. Now, how do we create the shares? The basic rules that we have to follow, they're simple rules, and some of them are actually those that I always say use a consultant before you come to start your business, and that is the first rule. And it says that we can issue only the shares that were initially defined in the articles of the corporation. So if you've done it yourself, you usually chosen one class of shares, common shares, with the regular privileges, all three attached to those, and that's it. So the moment you will want to issue preference shares, you will have to apply or to request an assistance of a consultant to apply for amended articles of incorporation, which technically will cost exactly the same like to incorporate from the very beginning. All three privileges, as I told you, must be present in the total pool of shares. Okay, so when I look at the total combination of all classes and all groups of shares, the control, dividends, and the equity should be present. They not necessarily should be present in one of those classes. They could be spread among different classes. Okay, now special considerations when we come to decide of the shares, how, when, and if we even need those. First of all, when you issue shares, especially in the company with more than one or two people involved, always define the basic rules applicable to each of the shares. So how can you sell? How can you transfer? How can you force the company to buy your shares out, or you can't? Limitations on the transfer or sale of shares that you want to implement in order to prevent your partner selling shares to someone you don't want to work with. The second is establish a proper shareholders agreement with controlling procedures, with limitations, as I just said. And I usually would say do it as your company grows. Don't do it from the very beginning. It just doesn't make sense to put money before the company actually has a value. No one will be interested either to sell it or to buy it. Always consider and assess the taxable outcomes of issuance, especially when you issue new shares. And what it means is that by issuing new classes of shares, or by issuing new shares inside the class, without getting paid at all, we might end up paying taxes and being liable towards CRA at the end of the day. So before you come to issue new classes or new shares to new investors, especially if those investments are significantly larger than what initially was issued for the shares, get a proper advice either from a tax lawyer or accountant that understands in this area, because it literally will result in you getting zero money from the corporation and yet owning thousands of dollars to the CRA. And the last one, plan for the future sale of a corporation. Okay, and what it means is by the distributing shares among different parties, you can significantly increase your capital gain exemption entitlement, and thus when you sell the corporation, enjoy from much bigger amount that you will get tax-free. But for that you need to plan it in advance, and in advance we're talking about years in advance. So if you actually plan to grow your business and to sell it eventually, come to us or to any other consultant and get a proper plan how to do it. Management rights. Always think which levels of control and management would you like to provide to certain shareholders, especially on the common shares level. If you want to use those shareholders to appoint themselves as directors and then as managers of the corporation, or you want to prevent them from doing so, define it in your shareholders agreement. Same thing about information rights. Remember, every shareholder in your corporation, with very limited exceptions, has the right to receive financial documents of that corporation, especially those relevant to those shareholders. So what it means is that when you bring new shareholders, especially investors, into your corporation, it should completely change your business approach, because it will result in your company being more transparent, more responsible, and you will have to adjust yourself to that new reality. So after we understand all the system, how the shares of the corporation work, and before you actually come to issue your next share certificate or your first share certificate, always be sure to come and talk to us or to any other advisor of your choice about the aspects that I just discussed. Or, as I always say, if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comment section below. I will be happy to answer. I usually try to answer every comment that is left, normal comment, at my channel. If you have more particular private questions, details about your business plans, then most probably would be better to go to our website, or to send me direct email to info@cbes.ca, or just go to the website and use the contact us page. So thank you for being with me today. Again, Eugene from CBES, and I'm looking forward to see you soon with new topics that we'll cover. Bye.